Jim Collison, we are here at the Heartland Developer Conference 2015 here in Omaha. I'm here with Adrian Kosciak, and I've been working on that to get that right. But Adrian, thanks for coming out. I appreciate you being part of the interview.
No problem. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you. Let's talk a little bit about you, who you are, who you work for, where you're located, those kinds of things. Let's get that out of the way.
So I'm from Chicago. I work for an organization called Parveda Solutions. We do a lot of technology consulting. My most recent projects have been in mobile app development, but I'm doing a talk here at HDC about graph databases, which is a big interest of mine.
Yeah. So why? How do you go from mobile to graph? How did that happen?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So I didn't exactly go for mobile to graph.
All right.
So mobile just happened to be the thing that we were working on with our current clients. But graph has always been an interest that I've had in mind, even before we started doing mobile app development at my current firm. So I've always been playing around with different graph databases and just seeing all the different kind of ways it can be applied and all the areas that it can be applied to.
Yeah. So let's back up a little bit. What is graph, right? For the average user who doesn't know, because this has been a fairly new term that's come on, a fairly new technology in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
At least in the mainstream. What is it?
So it's a way to describe data, but the most important part about it is that the relationships between different pieces of data are number one. They're first class. They're the most important part of the database. The relationships, the connection between different nodes in the database. So it's kind of moving away from the idea that I'm dumping all my data into these tables, and then I'm thinking about relationships secondary as foreign keys and primary keys. In a graph database, your relationships are primary. That's the first thing you're thinking about.
Okay. And so did graph come out of a response to the relational database systems that have dominated for so long, or what was the need for something different than that?
So I don't think it came as a response, like as any kind of pushback from any of the existing technologies, but it's more something that augments existing technology, something that people are realizing has a lot of value and offers a new area a new way to look at data, a new way to process data that they can get new insights out of and find new use cases for.
And so what's the primary benefit for me as an end user moving from relational, because that's dominated, to this? What's the benefit for me?
There are a lot of performance benefits for using a graph database, so graph databases are very good at traversals. They're very inexpensive. So if you want to find some information like who are Bob's friends or who are Bob's friends of friends, or the shortest distance between two nodes. But I personally think that the biggest benefit of a graph database is that it makes a lot of your data much more discoverable. So if you're looking at the structures that are found in your data in a graph database and you're querying that structure, you're identifying things that you wouldn't have noticed if you just had it in a relational database.
Right. So give me an example, like what's the coolest thing you've done to date with this, right? When you think about, man, I really nailed it on this one. What have you seen either worked on or that you've done yourself?
So I like to play around with the idea. So when I do a talk about graph databases, or I talk about graph databases, one thing I don't really spend a lot of time on, but I'm super interested in, is like dynamic graphs. So graphs that are changing over time, and then that driving some sort of feature or application. So something that I like working on is this concept of like a working memory. So you have your data in your graph, all these different nodes that can represent different things. For instance, individuals, social network. it's usually the go-to use case.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's where the data sets are right now,
Yeah.
right? Those are where the big, interesting data sets are. Yeah.
So, but the edges, those can also hold data. So if I call that data that's in those edges working memory, as the graph changes over time, if the edge ever disappears because it's no longer relevant, then the data that goes along with that edge would also disappear. So that's something I kind of worked on. It was a very interesting kind of application for graph databases.
Yeah. What were you hoping to get out of that? What at the end of the day, what was?
So to be honest, just hoping to get something cool out of it.
So it was more of an interesting, let's see what happens, as opposed to already having a predetermined destination.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. No.
And so I think that what I found interesting about it is just the idea of trying to take a dynamic graph and use that to drive features in an application.
Right. What's the future of graph then? Where is it as you look out over the next couple of years? What are you seeing so far?
In terms of the future of graph, so there's this kind of struggle between Neo4j and Tinkerpop is now starting to come up and be a bigger and bigger deal. So Tinkerpop is a framework.
Okay.
It provides abstractions and interfaces, standards for graph databases. And as that becomes more and more popular and used by more and more people, I think that's going to overtake Neo4j where it stands right now. But the more important part about that is it allows the actual graph database implementation to be whatever it wants to be. And for something like a Titan DB, it becomes more scalable because that's the focus of what they're building.
Right.
Versus like a Neo4j, which is really easy to pick up and really easy for individuals to use. But there's just more out there in terms of graph databases that you can use, which means you have more flexibility in using the right graph database for what you're going for. If you're trying to build a graph database with millions of nodes to figure out some really complicated query, then that technology will be there for you. Right. Whereas before it was usually just like, we're just going to try to handle some nodes here and then see what happens. Yeah. I don't know about scalability, and it's really starting to mature as a technology.
No, right on. It's fun to watch these things, and then there's always competing ideas, along those lines. What so in your session, what were you hoping like people would walk away? What was the one thing that you wanted to get across? The title was unique in that sense, but what were you hoping they'd walk away with?
So I was hoping mainly that people would walk away with a couple of things. Just the curiosity of just pick it up, just take a look at it. I want everyone to be aware of it as a technology that they can use. That it is a tool in your toolbox. Yeah, you should go ahead and try out. I wasn't trying to advocate it as a replacement for any database technologies, and I don't think it ever will be a replacement. But it is definitely a tool that everyone should be aware of and have. Yeah. So if you're working on a specific problem or you're trying to explore data in a specific way, graph databases are definitely something that you should be aware of.
Good. So it was a fairly evangelistic session.
Fairly, yeah.
You probably showed some things like here's the value and the benefits to be able to get this done as well. Yeah. Very cool. What kind of questions, or what was the most interesting question that you got out of your session?
One of the interesting questions I got was more around the storage back end of a graph database. So they can be built on top of either existing databases like a relational database, or they could just be native, like a custom built storage. So someone was asking me about the importance of that and how it works if it's built on top of an existing storage. Now, the interesting part of that question was the individual was asking because they had previously tried a graph database and it wasn't really scaling. Like they weren't able to get the benefits out of it that they thought they would get because they were throwing so much data into it. Well, the answer to the question was that something like Titan DB or another graph database engine is built on top of something like Cassandra and HBase that allow them to take advantage of the fact that those technologies allow you to scale and take in much more data and explore much more data. So I was able to answer the question by explaining that to them. So,
very cool.
So that individual could could keep interest in the graph database talks to you. Like, don't worry that it might not seem like it's it's taking on millions of nodes right now. In the future, definitely there will be technologies that will be able to handle that.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, good. Let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned early on you do some mobile, and what do you find interesting, because you're in it?
Yeah.
So I know your love is on the data side, right? I think that's come out pretty clear. But what are you seeing, or what's interesting to you on the mobile side right now when we think about technologies? As you look at that, what are you finding interesting?
Oh man, the most interesting thing I think about in terms of the mobile side is this idea of like, I feel like there's a tug of war between, hey, I want a technology where I can build a mobile app once and deploy it to mobile platforms. I don't want to have to worry about it.
Yep.
Versus, I really like, I don't care about like those technologies.
Yeah.
I just want you to build a specific mobile app native on an Android or an iPhone, because I want it to be the best mobile app that I could possibly build. That's going on right now. You've got these two camps that are fighting with each other, and usually it seems like organizations are actually just flipping from one to the other, where it's like they try one thing and they're like, oh my god, this
wasn't good enough. Let's try another one.
The other thing.
I think that's you're the first honest assessment of that scenario. I've interviewed people from both sides of the camp. One going mobile first was the conversation that we kind of had in that. And then, of course, a lot of folks are just saying, just run native. And then Microsoft guys are saying, well, you can do it all in Visual Studio, and then you flip it. And so I think at the end of the day, it really depends on just what you want to do.
It's definitely an it depends answer.
It really is.
Like, you gotta look at a number of factors to identify if you should go the cross-platform route or you should go to the native route. Like, is maybe how important both. Is it? Maybe.
See, I think actually the answer might be both. In my podcasting work that I've done, we have that same question of do you drive them to a podcatcher? So an iTunes, of course, they have a native one, and there's a lot of complaining about Android not having one. And so there's a variety of companies that are doing it. Or do you make your own app that you send people to listen to your shows? But that's just your app then. Then it doesn't have the functionality of being able to bring other people's feeds in. And so that same argument. So I've done both. I have a site you can go to listen to it.
Point, yeah.
I have an RSS feed that people can consume it with on their podcatcher. And we just are releasing now an Android and iPhone specific app for the podcast. It's like, because you almost need to find them wherever they're at.
Almost,
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you say that.
People just expect everything to work and be there when you want it.
No, right, and have it work without. I interviewed a guy yesterday. We were looking at the website, and he showed me some things, and I'm like, oh man, I'm doing it all wrong. I'm gonna have to this weekend. I'm gonna have to do some work to get it done. On the mobile side, do you specialize in a specific platform? Are you an Android or iPhone or how? What kind of mobile work are you doing?
So I'm doing currently at my current client, I'm doing a lot of Coney work, which is a cross-platform framework, but I'm also using Ionic on projects for a nonprofit. So it depends.
Okay.
Jump around between.
Yeah, that's real common too.
Yeah.
Kind of messing. I'm going to mess with this, and then I'm going to mess with that. I'm going to try this, and then I'm going to try it. It's not unlike in the early days when I think of the '90s, the middle '90s, when the PC was first coming on the scene, and we were really developing a lot of apps, and for that, and the web. Of course, in '97, the web came on the scene and really changed the whole way we looked at things. There was never a consistent methodology across any of those platforms. So you do a lot of browser-based development in those days, a lot of Windows-based development in those days. So
there was a company, a friend of mine who works for a company recently came up to me to ask me about my opinion on whether they should go cross-platform and native, and we ended up deciding that for them, it was best to go native because that they were so focused on the user experience,
Yeah.
and they wanted to make sure they got it right.
Yep.
And their audience for what
Yeah.
they were doing were mostly just individuals that had an iPhone or an Android, so that it was able to narrow it down to just like,
Yeah.
you only need to build an Android and iPhone app.
I still
Like,
think
all
both
those
is-
factors.
Yeah.
I don't know about both.
I think, because your users are going to come in. Sometimes they don't want to do an app.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Yeah.
They're like, you know what? I want to go to the website, and I think you have to make both experiences work. And it's hard.
I just
it's super
don't like,
expensive.
I just don't like going and be like, look, guys, you're gonna have to do all this stuff.
Actually, all of it is what you tell. All of it.
Don't worry, you can hire me to do it.
Don't worry. Use Graph, right?
Yeah.
So, Adrian, thank
Throw it
you.
into a graph, you'll be fine.
Let's throw it into the Graph. You'll be fine. Let's combine these two. When we think about using Graph on mobile, are there areas where that's happening?
I don't know of areas that I've seen where it is happening, but I definitely think it can and should happen.
Yeah. Well, you'll be right in the middle of it, right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Well, Adrian, thanks for taking some time to be with us today, and I
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
If folks wanted to track you down, if they had some questions for what you're doing here, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I guess the best way is just shoot me an email. I'm on Twitter at Kosciak, but if you have a specific question, I have no problem answering it by just emailing me at adrian.kosciak@powerbetasolutions.com.
Very cool. And we'll try to include that in the description of the YouTube video when we're done here. So if you're watching it on YouTube, just look down in the description down there, and hopefully we'll have that updated by now. Adrian, thank you.
Thank you.